Hello and welcome to today's presentation. My name is Dr. Kahalo Shukru, and I'm going to be presenting here on behalf of the subject of education studies to give those of you who might be thinking to come and study with us some idea of how our course runs and the kind of things we talk about and our view on education. With me today are two soon-to-be ex-students of ours just about to graduate, Kim and Sarah. Thank you very much. And a current student in Hope University, Gabby, who's not actually on the Education Studies course, but is studying a sort of a QTS course in primary education, so a related area to the kind of thing we talk about in Ed Studies. And they've all very kindly volunteered to help me out today by sort of acting or functioning a bit like a class would in a sort of an online session that we might run on our course, so you can kind of get a feel of how that would work, since it may be the format that a lot of you are looking at as we move into September in these slightly unusual times. Hello to the three of you here today. Hi.
Hello.
Okay. Now, what I'm going to do now in a minute is I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to talk to you all about the course. Some of you, obviously Sarah and Kim, you know the course. Gabby, you don't know it so well, but mainly I'll be sort of also needing you to kind of help me out with certain activities as we go along. So just bear with me for a moment. Okay. Right, so hopefully you can all see my screen, and you're seeing the first of my slides here, which is, this may be a format that we might be using on this course and others, depending on how things go ahead in September. Not necessarily for every session, but for some sessions. So it's a good kind of example of the kind of way that teaching might work in these kind of sort of socially distancing times. But I don't want to focus on the mechanism too much and talk instead about the course. So I'm here from what we sometimes call the Department of Education Studies, or the subject of Education Studies. And I'm going to talk a bit about the Education Studies course, what it's about, how it's run, as well as giving you a kind of a taste of a few of the topics we like to talk about and sort of some idea of how we view education. So the first thing I want to talk about is that I would say that for most people, what they think of as education is school. I mean, Sarah and Kim, for yourselves, when you came into Ed Studies, was school really your view of education? Was that where you thought education happened?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
Had you any idea of any education happening outside of school?
Yeah, some community projects I've been involved with previous, so I knew there was some work going on there as well.
Kind of like the extracurricular studies, well, kids groups, so like scouts and things like that was mainly like the one place I would have thought of. So that was outside of school.
I mean, we are all aware that the education happens outside of schools, but school still dominates our thinking in terms of what education is. And the Ed Studies course, while it is a preparation for those people who want to go on to do the postgraduate version of what you're doing, Gabby. So you're doing the undergraduate route into teaching, what they call QTS. Yeah. A lot of the people who come into Ed Studies are thinking they may want to do the postgraduate training for teaching the PGCE. And it is a good route into that, but it's not just that. We are more than just a kind of a preparation for teacher training. We see ourselves as preparing people for all sorts of careers and other areas where education goes on outside of the classroom. And really this sort of feeds into our view of education in general, in that we think of education as, oh, sorry, just jumping ahead there. We think of education as something that happens anywhere where one person is helping others to grow or develop or change, and is supporting that growth and supporting that development. And so teachers are one big part of that, and schools are one big part of that, but there's loads of other places when you think about it in life where we help other people to grow and change. And we consider those people to be educators here in the Education Studies course. And we consider the sort of things we talk about to be as relevant to that kind of education as the stuff that goes on in schools. And the other thing I should mention is that we think of education, we talk about the purposes of education in our course. And one of the things we talk about is that while education is part of the process to prepare people for the workplace, that's not all education is. And so I wouldn't want people to come into our course and only think about what they'll get out of it in terms of a job. We think all education gives people more than just training for the workplace, and we like to think our course is no different. Now, in terms of the way that our course is broken down, we take what's known as a disciplinary approach to the study of education. And that means that we think that to really understand education, you have to look at it through the lens of 4 different disciplines: sociology, history, philosophy, and psychology. Because we think that you only really understand education when you ask questions like, well, what is education for? What is its role in society? And that's a sociological question. So you need to understand sociology to understand that question. But you also might want to know, well, how has the education system ended up the way it is today? That's a historical question. Or maybe you're interested in, well, how do my students learn? What's a good way to run a class to ensure that everybody gets something out of it? The psychology of learning and behavior and how people grow and learn is the best way to understand that. So we think that through these disciplines, we give you the tools to understand education. Now, some people worry that they haven't got a background in these disciplines. They think, oh, do I have to have studied these at A level in order to do well in this course? And the answer is no. Again, Sarah and Kim, had you studied any of these things before you came into our course?
No.
No, not at all.
No.
None of them.
And which one, now be honest here, which one scared you?
Philosophy, yeah, that one mostly, I think.
Yeah.
It didn't change much over the years, but it was, yeah, I'd definitely say philosophy was the most scariest one.
Yeah, and Kim, how about yourself?
Psychology.
My discipline, okay, yeah.
But for the first 2 years, that kind of then led me to take psychology as my main discipline in 3rd year. So the first 2 years prepared me for that well.
Yeah, and that's how we try to do it. We try to kind of ease people into it. I mean, Gabby, for yourself, if you were coming into our course today, which one of these would intimidate you or worry you?
Probably the psychology side of it. I've not got any previous, I didn't do it at A levels or anything. I did philosophy at A levels, so I feel like even though I didn't do it in education, I might be a little bit more ready for it, but probably psychology would be the one that was most daunting, to be honest.
And it's fair enough. Whatever you don't know is the scariest thing. It's like the horror movie. It's what you can't see that scares you. And but the way we design our course, and you'll see that in a few minutes, is that we anticipate that, and so that nobody on our course is expected to have studied these things before, and you're at no disadvantage if you haven't, because we kind of take you from basic principles right up to a point where, as you found, Kim, you were ready to really run with it. So that, I mean, that's the way we like to run our course. Now, this is how this works. Now, just to be clear here, there's a number of ways in which you can do your studies at Hope University. One is where you do sort of combined honors, or sometimes called a double major. And in combined honors, you would do half of your studies if you did combined honors with us in Ed Studies, half of your studies, 50% of your time would be spent with us throughout the 3 years. And then 50% would be spent with another subject. Sarah and Kim, what was your second subject, out of curiosity? Mine was
single honors.
Oh, so you did. I'll be talking about that in a minute. And Sarah?
Mine was special educational needs.
Right. So you're half time with us and half time with them, right? Yeah. And then, so what you're seeing on the screen here is what the half of your course, if you did half of it with us, would look like. And you can see that in first year, you do all 4 of the disciplines. And that's what we call our foundation year. And it's your kind of introduction to those disciplines for the first time. How do they work? Basic principles, like I said, for the uninitiated, right? And then in second year, we build on that. We think, okay, you now have a grounding in the disciplines. We're ready to kind of move on to something a little bit more advanced. And then in final year, you'll see that you spend half your time, roughly speaking, working on a research project. That's your dissertation. It's your final year project. It's a big part of your studies, and you study on that. It's you yourself are working on it. You have a supervisor, a staff member who's supporting you, but otherwise it's your own piece of work, and you get to pick a topic you're really interested in and focus on something you think will be relevant to your career. But the rest of the time, you choose 2 out of the 4 disciplines. So you don't have to do all 4 in the final year. You get to pick 2. Which ones did you lot pick?
Psychology and sociology.
Okay.
Same for me.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, and that is mainly how I know Sarah and Kim, is that they were, I'm in charge of the psychology strand, and so they were part of the classes I was delivering. But you got to pick two that were the ones that you were most interested in, or the ones you thought would be most useful to you in terms of your career, or maybe the ones that scared you the least by that time. You thought, okay, right. I think maybe Sarah, were you ready to go? Okay, philosophy, been there, done that.
Philosophy was gone, yeah.
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 And I mean, that's not a trivial issue. Studying something you enjoy, studying something you think is relevant to you, will make you more likely to work hard at it, will motivate you. And so that's one of the reasons we work very hard to maintain this option of choice in our final year. So that's how the course works, and that's how it breaks down in terms of a sort of double major or combined honours. Now, I want to then compare that with the other option, which is single honours. Now, with single honours, basically, both sides of your degree are done with the Education Studies department. So you do the same. On the left here, you have our core course, and you're doing that same as the one with the people who are doing the combined honours. You do all the same classes they do. But if you're doing single honours with us, you also then do another 50% of your studies also with us, and that's what you're seeing on the right-hand side. And these classes are different in that rather than taking a disciplinary approach on the second part for single honours, we take a more thematic approach. And so we look at major themes in education. You're still encouraged to bring in disciplinary knowledge that you're studying in the other half of your course, but the structure of the course is different. And so, for example, in first year of the single honours, that part of the course, we focus on themes like education and culture. So we look at how people learn outside of schools, from family, from community. We also look at the idea of education policy. How did the government come up with the policies they do? What inform those policies? And we look at the idea of social justice. How does questions of inequality and disadvantage affect education, which is something very topical right at the moment? But also, what can education do about social justice? And that's just in the first year. Those are examples of the sort of the themes that we look at. In the second year then of the single honours, you would do a placement where we would arrange for you to get placed within a context, usually one that we try to find that's relevant to your interests, where you actually sort of get some work experience, but also learn about applying the principles that we're talking about in the workplace. Out of interest, Kim, you did single honours, yes?
Mm-hmm. I did.
Your placement, do you remember where it was or what you were doing?
It was in a community project called Women's Refugee Connect in Liverpool.
Right.
It was a community project set up to help refugee women and their children.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's only in the single honours course, unfortunately, that we can build in placement into the course. For people who are doing combined honours, 50% with us and 50% with someone else, we are very supportive of them doing placement in their own time, extracurricular effectively, but we can't build it into the course and we can't kind of arrange it for them, but we do try to support them in that. I don't know, Sarah, if you ever got a chance to do any placement while you were studying with us.
Not really, no. I did have a job which was kind of in a care home for autistic young adults and stuff, but it wasn't really a placement as such.
And that was something you'd organised yourself?
Yes.
Yeah, and a lot of our students do that. Even those that are doing combined honours will do placements or part-time work they've organised themselves. Some of them, sometimes they come to us and we help them arrange that, but other times it's something they do off their own steam, under their own steam. But like I said, if you're doing single honours with us, we build placement into the course, and we try to give you time within the course to do it, so as to kind of help you fit it in with everything else that you're doing. So those are your options. Two ways that you could come to study education studies with us: either 50% of your time, which was the combined honour course I showed you earlier, or you could spend 100% of time with us in ed studies by doing single honours, where both parts of your course are with us. Now, having talked about the structure of the course, I now want to kind of give you a sample of the kind of topics we talk about. What would it be like to be in one of our sessions? You know, I like to think of it as like being like one of those Kellogg's variety packs, you know, with all the little boxes of cereals, where you just get a taste of one before you decide if you want to buy the full box. and my kids always eat the Cocoa Pops. But so I'm going to talk about 2 or maybe 3 areas, depending on how much time I've got. The first of them is psychology, my home discipline, of course. Now, here's a question. This one is to all 3 of you, Gabby, Sarah, Kim. Have you ever been hauled up on your spelling? Because I was always getting in trouble for spelling.
Yeah, always.
I mean, spell checker saved my life. You know, even these slides are only spelled correctly because PowerPoint would tell me, you know, if I wasn't. I mean, Gabby, have you done placements in schools, and have you had to kind of talk to students about their spelling and how to spell correctly? Is that
yeah, definitely. A lot of the time. To be honest, I've been in year 2 and year 3, so you spend the majority of the time talking about spelling.
Right. And spelling, you're going to be teacher. Spelling is important, right? That's what we tell them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so if I was to have spelled this slide completely incorrectly, it would seriously hamper your ability to understand it, you would say.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, let me show you something and tell me, can you understand what is written here?
Yeah.
Can you find a correctly spelled word anywhere on that page other than the heading that I put up there?
It.
Was.
In.
But.
Yeah, there's like a few of them, isn't it? But the rest of them are, even though they are spelled completely incorrectly, you can understand them, can't you?
Yeah.
Now, the question is how? How do we do this? Let me focus in on one particular one, and you have a crack at it. So, firstly, what are those 2 words, and how do you know what they are? Anybody know what they are, and how do you figure it out?
Thought spelling.
Yeah, okay, you are correct. Gold star. Now, do you know how you're working it out?
Is it something to do with, like, you read the first and the last letter and then the bits in the middle?
Yes, that's a big part of it.
Your brain takes in the context. Sorry.
Okay, what do you mean the context?
Like the context of the paragraph that you're reading. So by figuring out some of it, you can kind of fill in the gaps of the rest.
Exactly, right. So you're right, Sarah, that the first and last letters are always correct in every word, and that's important. And that tells us maybe they are very important in helping us understand any word. But I think also, Kim, you're right that the larger context of the sentence helps us to figure out, well, what is a likely word that I would see at that point in the sentence? So, and what that tells us is that context, what's going on around us, is often important to help us understand what's happening. It helps us fill in the blanks, but also prior knowledge. You know, other sentences you have read and what is normal to see in a sentence or not to see in a sentence helps you figure things out. Prior knowledge is really important in figuring things out. For example, look at these blanks here. Now, can anybody tell me any of the missing words here?
Making a basic cake.
Okay.
I said sponge, yeah.
Cake or sponge, yeah. Any other guesses?
4 ounces of
4 ounces of flour, yeah, I was thinking.
Butter.
Butter, yes.
And 2 eggs.
2 eggs, yeah. Okay, so you know, I'll fill in the blanks. Well, actually, these days I should have really changed this, updated for the current time, which is making a very cake is very difficult given that there's no flour in any of the supermarkets. You might as well just buy a pre-made one. But you know, I didn't want to be that topical. So yeah, as you can see, here are the correct words. Now, how much would you say your past experience of having ever made a cake was important?
Yeah, definitely.
Massively, yeah.
Have you been doing any lockdown baking?
Too much.
The standard banana bread.
Yeah, banana bread is the lockdown bake of choice. So yeah, your past experiences help fill in the blanks. And this is not just true. And so in a sense, by studying reading, we learn some deeper truths about learning in general, not just about reading. That effectively, any student who's learning, their prior knowledge will be an important part of how they figure out new things, how they fill in the blanks or make sense of new words that they've never encountered before. And so this is just one example of how studying psychology teaches us things, not just about the particular topic we're learning about at the moment, which is like reading, but about learning in general. And so it tells us, for example, that your students' prior learning and prior experiences will be an important part of what helps them figure out new stuff. And that helps us to understand why social disadvantage is such a problem, that if you've lived in an impoverished environment where you haven't had the chance to learn much things or be exposed to many things before going to school, you're at a disadvantage right from the get-go, because you don't have the prior knowledge that other people have to help you figure out new things, or you have less of it. And it also tells us that if I want to ensure my students learn, I need to start at a place where I'm talking about things they already know, so there are not so many gaps. And once they fill those in, I move on to talk about new things. So I kind of gradually scaffold their learning. And that's mirrored in the way that we run our course. We start off in foundations with things you'll have heard of before. And it's only when you've got those gaps filled in that we move on to the next year and the next year, where you're ready for the more advanced stuff. So this is just one example of how understanding the way people learn and make sense of the world tells us things that are going to be useful when we want to be an educator in a more general sense. Right, I'm going to move on to your favorite topic, Sarah. Yeah, it's philosophy. And all the questions I ask here, Sarah has to answer first.
Great.
Only kidding. No, nothing of the sort.
Later, that's fine.
Don't worry about it. I think you'll find actually you're more than able for these ones. Now, philosophy, for most people, they don't see as easy a relevance to education as psychology. For many people, they understand instantly, yeah, I can see how psychology is relevant. But for philosophy, it's like, well, why will I even need this? And the reason why we need to study philosophy is that often we have fundamental beliefs, very core beliefs about the way the world works and what's right and wrong and how things should be. And even though we haven't often consciously thought about these beliefs, they're there and they are influencing our behavior. And so philosophy is often about digging down to reach those core beliefs and find out what they are, and to help us to understand how they make a difference to our world, and maybe introduce us to other core beliefs that other people have had that we might not have considered before. Now, often they do this in philosophy with dilemmas or hypothetical situations. So here's my hypothetical situation. Imagine I had decided that the world outside is just too scary and full of dangerous things. And so I've developed a machine which you can plug yourself into at home, and it will create a completely authentic virtual world. And I'm not talking about the virtual world you'll see on the internet. I'm talking about one that is absolutely indistinguishable from the real world. You will think it is real. But it's artificial. And the big advantage to this artificial world is that nothing bad can ever happen to you in it. Imagine that. No more viruses, no more bad weather, no more getting knocked down by the bus maybe as you cross the road. It will be perfectly safe. Only good things will happen to you. And it will be full of people you can interact with who will act like real people. They won't be, they'll be virtual, but my artificial intelligence will make your interactions with them as real as with any other person out there. Now, the one catch is that once you plug yourself into this machine, you can't unplug. It's a one-way journey, right? Now, I want you to think about this for a moment, all three of you. What's your gut reaction? Do you like the sound of it? Do you not? If you had to make up your mind pretty quickly, which way would you go? Yes or no?
No.
Okay. Fairly strong reaction for you, Gabby. How about the other two? What do you think?
No.
No.
Okay. Now, that's not uncommon. You know, it should be odd, wouldn't you? You'd think it'd be odd. Here I'm offering you a life which will be only good from now on. And you're saying, nah, no thanks. You know, why? What is it about this kind of machine and the virtual life that I'm offering you that makes you unlikely to want to take it up? Can you put it into words?
I think for me, it's about it's obviously it's false. So I think I'm a great believer in you can't experience the good without experiencing the bad. So bad things make good things better.
Okay, so we worry that a lack of contrast. Yeah. Okay, so yes, into every life some rain must fall. But I mean, it's always possible that that's just something we tell ourselves when bad things happen. You know.
Going through experiences of like negative things and bad things, it kind of builds who you are as an individual. So like look at lockdown, for example, it's kind of changed the way a lot of people kind of act towards each other, and businesses, the way that they've adapted. So I think you wouldn't have been able to do that in that virtual world of happiness, because everything seems to work and nothing would ever change. Whereas if you have got bad, you need that change.
Okay, so bad things can stimulate change. Any other, Gabby, what's your thoughts on this? Why you were very definitely no?
Yeah, I think for me it's the handing over control to a machine. I think it's all that sort of freaks me out a little bit.
Okay.
I think that was where my initial reaction came from, handing all that over to some machine that someone's created. And yeah. So
you want to feel like you have some control in your life, and
I'd like to think so. Obviously not, but I'd like to think so.
You have heard of Ofsted, right? It's control in your life might be something you have to negotiate with other people. Right? Okay. I mean, this thought experiment was first posed by a philosopher called, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Nozick. And Nozick felt that what they were trying to demonstrate here was that the pursuit of happiness, which is called hedonism, that's the philosophy of we should be trying to be happy and being happy is the most important thing, is not a complete philosophy for life. That we feel if that was all we were pursuing is just good times, there would be something missing. And that's, you find that when you ask people about this machine, they feel something is missing, that, that maybe they won't make a difference in their life. And that they want to experience real world, which is messy and complicated and new things. And they want to be a sort of person, as you said, Gabby, that's in control, that has a certain set of it taps into certain things we hold very dearly that we didn't realize we held very dearly, like a need for control or a need to make a difference, or an idea that maybe too much of a good thing could become boring, Now, the reason that this kind of thought experiment is important to education is that in education, we are often very much trying to pursue happiness as a major goal. I mean, almost every teacher, whether they're in a school or university, is concerned about their students' happiness. And sometimes that's just because we are good people and we want our students to be happy. But other times it's because it's how we're evaluated. I mentioned Ofsted earlier. In universities, it's the REF and the TEF, the Teaching Excellence Framework. Our students are being asked if they're happy, and their responses will be one way in which we are publicly ranked as a university, how good we are. And so many universities, including ours, are very concerned about how happy their students are. And now, as you can see, here's the results of a very recent evaluation of our students. I think this was 2018. Hope University was basically among I think it's the top in the Northwest and in education studies providers, the education studies course. The students there, our students were more satisfied than almost any other students on a comparable course. Now, in one sense, that's something I'm very pleased about. I'm obviously happy that my students are happy. But as the Nozick thought experiment shows us, happiness is not all people are looking for. And the pursuit of happiness, while it's a good thing, if it's done at the expense of everything else, could be a problem. So, for example, I was thinking about open days, because obviously we're on a virtual open day here right now. And in open days, you always hear about the happy students. All the open day prospectus will show happy, smiling students on a sunny campus, and all the quotes that you'll see on slides and in the presentations like mine are from happy students and what they liked. And these quotes here are real quotes from my students. But what if I have to make a choice in my course about how I deliver it, where I know it's going to make my students less happy? Maybe it's the way I deliver the course, maybe it's the way I run a session, and I know if I run it this way, they'll learn more, but it's harder work for them and they're not going to like that. Now, that's a trade-off I have to make. Am I willing for my students to be less happy and potentially maybe rate me less well on the TEF evaluation at the end of the year, which is not going to make me look as good? Do I think it's worth taking that hit in order to achieve another goal, which is, I think, maybe them learning more or them being better prepared for the world outside? And that's something I think that every educator needs to weigh up. Are you mainly concerned with your students being happy? Are you willing to deal with the fact that students might be unhappy about something if you thought it was in their interest? Out of interest, for those of you that were on the Ed Studies course, Which part of it did you find the hardest or the most frustrating, or, you know, you wished was different, I guess? Where did you personally find it was toughest?
I think personally I struggled most with philosophy in year 2, but that, again, it's really hard to kind of weigh it up why, really, to be honest, probably because it was really new.
Yeah, okay. And for yourself, Sarah, I mean, what was there any aspect or part of the course, any of the assessments, anything like that that you thought, God, that was hard work?
Possibly first year, but I think that was just for like personal reasons, in the sense that I'd been out of education for quite some time.
Okay.
So to come back into like having to write essays and be very academic, and Harvard referencing for that took me.
We found Harvard referencing. How about yourself, Gabby? Where do you find what's the hard bit for you?
I think it's probably the assignments when you have to go off. I think specifically because of coronavirus, we had an assignment that we sort of had a lot of support from uni, but it was still sort of a bit more on our own than the other ones had been, just due to the circumstances, and that was probably a little bit difficult for me personally.
Now, and the thing is that as an educator, I'm always aware of the things I know you're going to have problems with, that you're going to struggle with, and I can think, well, I could make that easier. Maybe, you know, I could sort of give you more guidance, and or I could let you sort of drop one of the disciplines a little bit earlier so you didn't have to study it. And I know that would make my students happier, but I also know that that would probably make them less well prepared for the world post-graduation, that they would learn less. And so unless I've really sat down and asked myself, what am I here to do? What does it mean to be an educator? What does it mean to be educated? Then I'm not prepared to make those decisions, even though I'll have to make them. And that's where philosophy is important, is that it makes us face up to the fundamental beliefs that drive us, even though we don't realize they're there. Now, the third topic I want to talk about is, I want to tell you a story. Now, space race. The 1960s, the US and the USSR are competing to get a man into space and a man on the moon. And one of the problems they find is that it's difficult to write things in space, and their astronauts often have to write stuff down because they're making course calculations and making notes on their scientific experiments. But traditional pens don't work in space. And so the Americans spent billions of dollars developing a space pen, which could work in zero gravity. And after years of research and billions spent of taxpayers' dollars, they make the space pen, and it's great. And the Russians use a pencil. Now, when you hear that story first, it has a kind of, it makes you smile, because it sort of sounds like almost like a joke. There's a twist at the end. And I've heard that story dozens of times. It circulates in the internet, and I've even seen it written in psychology textbooks as an example of different ways of solving the same problem. There's only one small issue. The story is complete rubbish. It's not true. Both the Americans and the Russians used pencils in space initially, but there's problems with using pencils in space that I won't go into. And a private company in the US, having heard about the problem, spent their money to develop a new space pen and sold it both to the Russians and the Americans. So it's not true that the Americans spent billions of taxpayer dollars. The private company spent their own money, and they spent a reasonable amount. And it's not true that the Russians came up with a cleverer way of solving the problem. And yet, even though we know the story isn't true, it continues to circulate, and it continues to be published in even reputable textbooks. Now, the question is why? Why would we go on telling a story because it isn't true? The reason is that because the story contains messages, little viewpoints on the world that people kind of resonate with, or that make sense to them. So can any of you think of any little morals in that story, anything it says about the world which people might identify with? Does it say anything about the Americans? Does it say anything about the Russians? Does it say anything about governments? This is a trickier one. So how does it make the Americans look compared to the Russians?
A bit daft.
Right, yes.
A bit
so
dramatic.
It makes... Sorry?
A bit dramatic. They go into extreme lengths to try and solve a problem that can already be solved.
Yeah. So it presents the Americans as kind of not very smart and over-reliant on technology, maybe. It presents the Russians as kind of crafty and innovative, but maybe not very wealthy. See? Sorry, Kim, yeah?
I was just going to say, I suppose you could reflect that on governments, though, that they like to be seen to be fixing something or solving a problem and doing something.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And the Americans are potentially more wealthy in the fact that they've got all this money to throw at a project.
Yeah.
And
they're wasteful is the other image of wasteful governments, wasting our tax dollars on stupid space pens, right? So even though we know the story isn't true, we might still tell the story because it contains lessons we think are important. Viewpoints in the world that we personally hold, that we think, yes, I think that's an important viewpoint. I want other people to share that viewpoint, so I will tell this story because it contains a lesson I think is important for other people to learn. Now, we don't realize we do that with stories. We know we do it with fictional stories, that we know those stories contain lessons. So you think of Aesop's fables, you know, the crow and the jug of water, or the tortoise and the hare, that kind of story with a lesson in it. We know about those. What we don't realize is that many times the stories we tell about history are also full of lessons. And as a result, we tell the story not just to simply recount what happened, but because we think when I talk about that period of history in the way that I tell it, it contains an important lesson for people today. And so this is how we should always look at the stories we tell about history. Firstly, we should recognize they are stories. They are going to be a mixture of things we know or things we don't know, and maybe even things that aren't true. But also we should always think about any history that we hear, who's telling it, and what is the purpose of that history? Why do they tell it in that way? So at the moment, we're having a debate in the country about what statues we put up and what version of history those statues are selling. And some people believe that they're selling a version of history which makes some people look more important and other people look less important. And maybe that's what the statue is there to do, even if the people who put up the statue weren't consciously aware of it, or even if the people who like the statue aren't consciously aware of it. The idea that certain history, certain versions of history promote certain stories that we want to be promoted. And so this is a historian's view of history. We don't just think of history as a bunch of things that happened. We think of it as a story we tell with a purpose. Now, this is important in education because often when we talk about education in the past, we are telling stories. Have any of you ever had a grandparent or member of your family who talks about how it used to be in the good old days and when they were in school?
Yes.
Yeah.
What were the messages, or what was the point of the story that they were telling, do you think? What were they trying to say about the past compared to the present?
Almost that it was kind of like more of a hardship for them. Like back in my day, we didn't have all the technology. We had to go and look in a book. You couldn't just Google, and the hardships and stuff we have it easy in a sense these days.
Do you think that they believe the hardships built character, or one of those great...
Definitely.
And I think that's why we talk about it. We talk about the past in a certain way to make a point that these days kids have it too easy, is the message they're trying to tell you there. You know? And so often when people look nostalgically into the past in education about how it used to be, or this kind of golden age, or talk about getting back to the basics, what they're trying to do is actually critique modern education. Go, look, it was better in the past, and this is why it was better. And so this is how we need to think about any histories of education that we hear about. They're not just a neutral, here are the facts, but they are intended to convey a message or make a point. So what I've tried to show you there are just a few examples of how we like to use the various disciplines of philosophy, history, and psychology to understand education, and the kind of questions we try to grapple with and the way we try to make sense of education using those disciplines. Now, I want to talk very briefly about the way our course is structured in terms of the various classes that you would go to. So pretty much all courses in Hope University have a similar structure in the sense that you do a combination of lectures, which are usually one person like myself delivering to a large group of people. You also then do smaller group sessions. So a lecture could be one lecturer like me talking to up to 100 students. And it's mainly about that person talking and explaining things and kind of giving you an introduction to things. In tutorials and seminars, those are smaller groups. So basically you would have one member of staff working with maybe 10 or 20 students. And that's much more about the students getting involved and interacting with each other and working on kind of tasks and discussing things in the session. So it's much more interactive. Out of interest, of the different kinds of sessions for all of you, which one did you like the most, or which type do you find you enjoy the most?
For me, it was definitely seminars.
Same
Okay.
for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I quite like the tutorials because I think because the smaller the group, I found it was, like, especially the first couple of years, I think I was able to kind of talk more freely, which when came into the bigger groups, and especially in third year, I was able to more confidently speak to the smaller groups were helpful.
Yeah, and the smaller groups are good like that. They help you build your confidence by making a smaller number of people.
Yeah.
Did you find you were able to interact more with the staff member in the seminars and tutorials than in the lecture?
Definitely, yeah.
And that's the other thing that we like to do, is that we know lectures aren't a great place for student support. So we know that seminars and tutorials are often a better place to kind of get to interact with your students. Now, of course, it doesn't all have to happen in class. It's quite possible for you to go and see any lecturer in their office hours outside of class time where you can just talk to them one-on-one. And that's something I think is quite different about Hope than other institutions, in that Hope very much encourages you to do this and insists that all staff are available to do this, whereas in many institutions and other universities I've heard of, it's much harder to get access to any of the lecturers. There's less of a culture of the lecturers being available outside of class. And I think that's an important part about what makes Hope good in terms of supporting students. In terms of assignments, we tend to, in first year, try to do the majority of our assignments as coursework, something that you're working on as you go along. So you will do a very early piece very early on where it'll just be very low stakes, not many marks at stake, but you can learn from that and get feedback. There's an essay you're working on throughout the first year. And then there's a portfolio, lots of smaller assignments that you complete in the seminars. And the idea is to give you feedback as you're going along so that you learn as you go, but also to kind of turn down the volume and the importance of the exam so that it's not such a high stakes assessment, because the A levels and other forms of assessment, other levels of study, the exam is such a big deal. And it's so all or nothing that it makes the exam incredibly stressful. And we want to move away from that because we think that's not necessarily the best way to learn. So this, I'd say this approach is very common in that most courses in Hope University use it. So if you do education studies with another course, they'll probably use a similar type of assessments as the ones you're seeing here. Now, in terms of sort of what makes Hope different from other universities, I know how I see it as being different. I mean, I've tried to put here on the slide what I think are the qualities about Hope that I think are important about what we do and what make us a good place to come and study. Out of interest, for the three of you who have studied here, from your perspective, even talking to other friends in other universities, what was it that made a difference for you in Hope? Where did Hope kind of, you feel, well, okay, that really impacted on how I studied or how I learned or my enjoyment?
I think for me, it was definitely like you've put on there, the small campus community feel. I think that was very much a big part of it. When you came, it was sort of like, it's not like other unis in that there's buildings all over the city or whatever. Everything was sort of in one place. You had, like you said, you tutors that you could go and see often, especially because I lived on campus first year. Everything was sort of readily available, and everyone sort of, I knew all of my tutors and they knew me and things like that. So that's what I felt like Hope gave that other unis might not have been able to offer. Okay.
How about the other two? I mean, any thoughts on this one?
The support I found was second to none. It was, I mean, I know a lot of places say that they actively encourage students to go to staff if they're struggling, but Hope really do live it, and you couldn't knock the support that you got from staff, and it was genuine support as well.
Yeah.
And another thing as well, I think you've mentioned there the specialist knowledge of academic staff. I think Hope are really good in matching the skills of the team that they build around the the content of the course, which I think is quite unique as well. So you'd always end up with someone specialist teaching you.
Yeah, definitely.
How about Sarah? Anything to add to that from
Yeah,
your
I
own
think
experience?
pretty much the same as the other two. I think the knowledge that you know that your tutors that you've got, the support they give, it's almost like second to none. Like they want you to succeed. They'll do anything, pretty much anything, to help you to get that. It's like, I think, yeah, just a support from tutors, and it's definitely something I used.
I mean, we expect you to work hard. You know, we support, but you know, there's a kind of a, we do our bit, you do your bit. It's not where nobody's carrying anybody else. But I think that's important that we have high expectations of our students. We want them to do well. We expect them to succeed, and we're there to support them, to sort of help them get there. I mean, ultimately, I think that comes across very much in the feedback we get, and in our student satisfaction, which I mentioned earlier, is not the only thing that matters. But I think it is telling that we get such high marks from our students, even though we put them through tough times and hard work, that at the end of it all, they kind of feel, yeah, I got something out of that. It was worth working hard. And I think that's one of the reasons we do well in the National Student Survey, which is part of this teaching excellence framework I've mentioned before. So I think we earn those, but I think it's our students who kind of do the hard work as much as we do. I mean, ultimately, in education studies, we tried to put a name on where we wanted our students to be at the end of their degree. You know, where did we want them to end up? And we were influenced by a number of people who wrote about education, talking about what they thought the qualities were of good students. And we resonated particularly with this quote here from Garmin about, you know, students who were open-minded and who had a commitment to social justice. And we thought, yeah, that's exactly the kind of people we want to see coming out of our degree. And so we built on the description you see here, and came up with a label for which we call the Hope Education Professional. And essentially this is technical problem there. And this is a sort of a thumbnail sketch of what we think sets our students apart from other students on other education studies courses. Sorry, just jumping ahead there accidentally. So we think that our graduates have the qualities that, sorry, just a bit of a technical problem here. No. We think that our students have the qualities that often they don't appreciate. You know, we've seen them change, we've seen them grow over the last 3 years, but they often didn't know that they had these qualities or that those were any different from any other graduate elsewhere. We knew, and we wanted to kind of give them a way of describing themselves to other people, so that when you're going forward and you're putting yourselves forward for a job interview or a postgraduate recruitment position, and you want to sort of explain to them why they should pick you among all the other graduates out there, we wanted to let our students know, look, these are the qualities you have. You may not see this, but we see it. And we think that our students, they're the ones who achieve this. We don't gift these qualities to them. This is how the students, where they end up after their hard work. And we're kind of steering them in this direction, but they're the ones that have to walk the walk. Ultimately, we think that after graduation, there are a number of careers open to a student who's been through the education studies course. I mean, obviously, like I said, a big part of that is going to be going into teaching. About 50% of the graduates from our course go on to do a teaching career. About 75 to 85% of the people who finish our course who apply to a PGC, which is the postgraduate teacher training course, about 75% get in on their first go. And that's pretty impressive numbers for any group of people getting into a PGC course, because they're not easy to get into. But you have to remember that's only about 50% of our students even want to go in that direction. Others find that as they come through our course, there's lots of ways to scratch that itch. There are other ways they can be an educator without being in a classroom or without being a teacher. I mean, I'm going to ask this one to Gabby, and I asked you about this a bit previously. Have you ever wondered what you would do if you didn't go the distance in teaching?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I took a gap year before I came to uni, and that year was very much about me working out whether I did want to do something so niche and so specific as primary education with QTS, and afterwards I decided that I did, because there wasn't anything else that I was interested in at the time. Obviously doesn't mean that in the future that I won't go somewhere else, because there are loads of things that interest me. But when I was choosing my degree course, I did a lot of work in schools and things just to make sure that I did want to sort of make my degree as specific as it is, which I did decide to do, obviously, in the end.
Yes.
But I have thought about other things, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, just to remind everybody, obviously, you didn't go through the education studies course. You went direct into teaching, and you know, we find that a lot of people who were dead certain they wanted to become teachers go through our course and come out the other end actually thinking maybe there's other things I could do. Almost a bit like what you did with your gap year. They took a second look at it, and some of them go ahead and go, yeah, I want to be a teacher, and some of them think, actually, no, I've changed my mind. The only advantage I would see over our course over doing what you did with the gap year is I think that our course will prepare them for other options and other opportunities if they decide not to go the teaching route.
Definitely,
or if later on they decide, actually, teaching isn't working out for me, I want to try something else. I think our course prepares them for a great variety of other careers, not just teaching. And I think that's one of its assets. I mean, there's lots else you can find out about in our course. And if you want to talk to somebody like me about it, you can contact the university, and they can sometimes answer your questions about the university in general. But if you want to talk to someone like myself to find out more about specifics about the course, that's fine. I think you can, I need to sort of call upon my support here. Jenny, can you remind me if people want to email a general email address for the university?
Yes, the email address is outreach@hope.ac.uk.
Right, and so they can use that to find out about almost anything about the university and courses here that they're interested to know.
Yes, absolutely.
And if they've got specific questions about maybe just education studies, you can put your query as being, can you please direct this to education studies? And so they can answer it, and they'll forward the query on to someone like myself, who'll be more than happy to get back to you with answers to your questions and any sort of advice or guidance that you need. I hope you found this talk useful and has given you a kind of flavor of how we do what we do in education studies. For those of you who like what they see here and think that they like going to sort of the destination where we're heading for, then I look forward to having you join us. I'd also like to thank Gabby, Sarah, and Kim for being very good sports and joining in. Thank you very much, the three of you.
All right, no worries.
Okay, so we will wrap it up there. Good luck, and I hope to see some of you in the near future.